America has not reached the full capacity of its greatness. The only way America is going to be able to reach the full capacity of its greatness is if it starts to match more its action with its words. And Dr. King considered the words of the American Foundation to be a promissory note. And so I'm going to start off by kind of talking about some of the promises that the U.S. government has made to its citizens, and then we're going to kind of shift into how that works and translate into various actions toward typical or different communities. I'm going to let you in on a secret. I'm a black man. Okay? So much of my presentation is going to be dealing with the black community and my experience as a black man. That is not to say that other groups don't suffer the same type of discrimination that I'm going to get into today. But I'm going to speak from a lens from which I have personal experience. And I hope that I will challenge some of the ideas that you have about what makes us great as a nation and what roads we can take to become a greater nation, the greatest nation in all of history. So, first, we're going to start with the Declaration of Independence. If you can see it, read along with me.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute a new government.
Neither
Slave nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws. Finally, that's the 14th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And as observed by Dr. King, these words construct a promissory note. However, insofar as her citizens of color are concerned, the U.S. government stands in default of this promissory note. How does it stand in default? There are a few examples I'd like to share. First, the issue of extrajudicial killings. 3/4 of individuals who were lynched were black. 55% of individuals who are involved in police-involved shootings are black. However, black individuals are less likely to be armed with a weapon or just as likely to be armed with a gun as our white counterparts. However, more than half of the bullets used by law enforcement are aimed toward black bodies. Mass incarceration. 1 in 3 individuals, black individuals, through their lifetime can expect to be incarcerated. Compared to their white counterparts, 1 in 17 men can expect to see incarceration throughout their lives. Finally, when we talk about voter disenfranchisement, 1/3 of individuals who lost their right to vote are black, despite the fact that black individuals only make up about 12% of our population. Right? I told you I was going to challenge some things that you've probably been thinking about. Right? So we're in default as far as black citizens are concerned. Well, when we look at the recourse of what happens in that default, we recognize that the history of the U.S. has pitted law enforcement against the black community, right? From the very beginning of the U.S. existence, actually it started in 1619, we had an institution called slavery. That institution bled into convict leasing, which bled into Jim Crow, which bled into mass incarceration. There's not been a single period in U.S. existence where black individuals were not disproportionately impacted by the law. Well, when we ask ourselves, what does equal protection actually mean? We have to be concerned about this disproportionality. Well, if we look at the relationship that law enforcement has had in those policies, then we understand why there's such a fundamental distrust between the black community and law enforcement, right? Law enforcement started as slave patrols. Their sole function was to keep slaves in line or to catch runaway slaves. That was their only role when they started, right? So then they move on to convict policing, and their role in convict policing, mass incarceration, all of this start with arrests out in the field, right? So law enforcement is a part that's actually the face of the discrimination as far as the black community is concerned. And this has caused quite a disdain between the communities. My question is, how or should we work to make this better? And of course, I think the answer to the should question is yes. The answer to the how question, I'm going to try and provide that for you. So why should we talk? The problem is much deeper than black individuals versus the police, right? Because the police are just enforcing the law, right? And in fact, I've sat down with dozens of police officers in order to do this research, and I found that I have more in common with police officers than I don't have in common with police officers. At the end of the day, we want to live in a safe community. We want to live in a peaceful community. We want to go home to the families that we love. We want to see the world, right? These are all experiences that we share as humans. And police officers, just as black individuals, are not exempt from these same desires. So if we have the same root desires, then why is it that we have such a hard time coming to commonality with how we can reach those desires together? Well, that problem is we're not talking, right? And the question is, will talking actually work? I'm going to argue that it will. Talking reduces collateral damage. As I said, many black individuals and law enforcement have the same desires in mind. If law enforcement wants to make it home at the end of the day, so does the black individual. And recognizing that empathy, I think, will get more understanding. Actually, that's my next point, so I'll just go ahead and pop that up there. Right? We'll get more understanding, and those situations will allow for individuals to have greater understanding, great relationships. In fact, I think it was said earlier, you have a hard time critiquing somebody that you have a relationship with. Well, I'd imagine you probably have a really hard time shooting that person as well, right? So if we start developing relationships, then we'll probably start seeing a lot less of the violence, because it's hard to enact violence against somebody you are in relationship with. Right? So the foundation of this discussion is the establishment of relationships. The result of these relationships become greater public safety for everybody, because as I said, we all want to live in safe communities. We all want to go to work. We all want to go home. We all want to pray in ways in which are going to forward our humanity, not deprive us of it. And I think if we also talk more things out, we're able to pinpoint how we can actually make some of the systemic changes that causes a rift between our communities and the individuals that compose it. So, how do we get such a conversation started? Well, it starts with meetings, right? And I'm not going to make this seem easier. Okay, that's just going to do what it wants to do. I'm not going to make this seem easier than it is, right? This is going to take stakeholders from both sides coming together and saying something needs to change. And they're going to have to make that phone call to the other side and say, can we sit down and have a discussion? And I'm not going to trivialize this process. It's incredibly hard. It's incredibly difficult, right? I went through this process. And in fact, it took 3 nights of consecutive nightmares to motivate me to finally ask my wife, who's the vice president of this project, to give the nearest police chief a call, which was Chief Pickwick right here in Laverne. Right? So that first meeting is very important, but we have to have the bravery, right? We have to be able to step outside of our vulnerability to call that meeting and to conduct it. From those meetings, the empathy, the education that can be gained and learned will create a system of trust. And in that system of trust, we can ask for things. And one of my asks to other police chiefs were, can they participate in a Truth and Reconciliation program. Why do we want a Truth and Reconciliation program? Because people are not listening to each other, right? And so we have to not only be willing to talk and have our voice be heard, but we have to also be willing to listen and to be willing to accept what that other side is willing to say. And the only process I know that situates parties to be able to do that is the Truth and Reconciliation process. From that, we can gain partnerships, and from those partnerships, we gain reform. So my nonprofit is called the Social Justice Advocacy Project. Our mission is to provide empowerment tools to disenfranchised individuals for better self-determination. What that means practically, we do a lot of pro bono legal clinics. Literally every week, we are providing free legal services and free legal advice to members of the community. But what we also do is we create safe spaces in communities where people are striving to better themselves, right? Particularly disenfranchised individuals, the poor, minorities. So, a couple years ago, an individual named Philando Castile was killed. And I always tell the people that I mentor that it's not ever worth it to fight police in the street, right? They got tanks, they got guns, sometimes they have bombs, right? They have a lot of cool stuff that we don't even know they have. They are guaranteed to win that fight, right? So take the ride and we'll take the fight to the courtroom. But what happens when people are afraid that they won't make it to the courtroom? And Philando Castile's death sparked fear in my own mind. I live in a region that is composed of about 6 to 8% black individuals. I don't feel like I'm at home. I don't look around and see people who look like me and therefore feel safe, right? So I needed to understand, what are police thinking about people like me? What is my police chief thinking about people like me? And what does his rank and file think about people like me? So I reached out, or actually had my wife reach out to the chief, right? Because I understand that in militaristic structures, there's a strong chain of command. If an order is given from the top, it will be followed throughout the range because that's the way that they're structured, right? So if I understand the thinking of the police chief, then I'm probably able to understand a little bit better the culture of that particular department. And so my wife reached out to Laverne, right? But when I started those meetings, I didn't go to the meeting saying, hey chief, here's a problem that I have with what you're doing. Here's how I think you're doing your job poorly, right? I didn't go there to criticize him. I went there because I needed to learn. It's hard to criticize something that you don't fully understand, right? So the point of that meeting was simple understanding. And because that was the way that I took on that meeting, it snowballed such that anytime I placed a phone call, I was able to get a meeting with the chief from that particular department. And in fact, the California Highway Patrol, after hearing about the work we're doing, reached out to me and asked me to come meet with them and their chiefs and their higher ranking officers in order to have the same discussion that I was having with local law enforcement. So what I saw wasn't a reluctance to participate, I actually saw a willingness to participate. However, that willingness only came because of the context in which the ask was being made. A context of wanting to understand, not a context of criticism and ridicule. So I cover this entire region except for Charter Oak, right? So every single police department in this region, I wanted to understand. Why? Because my West Covina Rotary Club is in West Covina. My law office at the time was in West Covina. I had an office in Pomona. I work here in the University of Laverne. I live in Laverne. I travel through all these cities on a daily basis. I need to know not only that I'm safe in this city, I need to know that I'm safe in the region, right? The places where I work, play, right? So I talked to the leadership in this entire region in order to gain better understanding of what was going on. So here's some of the pictures. The meeting that I had with the Azusa Police Department, most of these meetings were about an hour long, right? I sat with Chief Hunt from Azusa for about 3 hours because we were genuinely interested in learning from each other. And as I stated, I didn't have issues getting meetings with these individuals. We can talk about this later in the panel. I want to make sure I'm good with time. At the meeting, I presented a 15-point platform, right? Because I'm not just there to ask questions. I also want to present some of my ideas, right? So I typed it up in 15 points that I thought would be a good conversation starter. And I asked the police chiefs about their opinions on each and every last one of these things. Finally, I asked them to participate in a truth and reconciliation process. The reason I wanted them to participate in a truth and reconciliation process is because I had done research on truth and reconciliation and its usage in other countries. And that usage ended up being what ends the apartheid, what helps Panama work towards some of the justice questions that they have. Even Canada, the way that they were treating their Aborigines residents, discrimination all over the world, truth and reconciliation seem to be the mechanism to bring these groups to truth. The process itself is concerned with fact-finding and peace generation. We're not concerned with retribution and who's going to go to jail. We're concerned about coming together and mending the wounds that several of us experience that prevent us from working together and our communities from progressing. So in the local application, I used the 9 agencies that were interested and that gave me their commitment to participate. And we did 2 truth and reconciliation programs. We did 2 of them, and in fact, we're planning a 3rd one, because every single time we do one, I learn a little bit more about the people involved. I learn a little bit more about how I can engage people a little better. I learn a little bit more about how I can make this program more effective. And I think if we can get a critical mass of individuals to participate in the truth and reconciliation process, we will see legitimate change. So the first truth and reconciliation process, both of them took place in Pomona. It started with the general Q&A that was asked to the panel police chief, right? I wanted to create a baseline of information that the entire room was operating on, right? So there are no assumptions, and if there all are assumptions, then those assumptions are ready to be challenged based on information and statistics. Individuals from the audience were permitted to speak for 2 minutes to provide their truths. Law enforcement was not required to respond to each truth, and in fact, gave a statement of reconciliation at the end that permitted them to respond to various issues that they heard throughout the truth process. The second truth and reconciliation involved a process called collaborative rationality. Now, authors Innes and Bohr have this structure of how it was mentioned earlier. There has to be equality between groups if we expect for these groups to actually come together and discuss change, right? So Innes and Bohr creates this model that the best way to get groups to feel equal is to put them face to face against each other, to provide basic information to them. Make sure everybody is on the same informational page. So everybody has equal time to talk. So law enforcement had the same amount of time to talk as the private residents, right? Both sides had equality throughout the entire process. We brought together more than 40 businesses, nonprofits, and public agencies in order to create a diversity of representation to ensure that we had major groups at the table for this particular program. And so the result of it, surveys suggest that more than 90% of individuals who went through this process actually reported gaining better understanding of the other individual. They also report better understanding of the role of collaboration and partnership and how that in and of itself could be a tool for healing the community. Finally, more than 89% of individuals who completed the survey responded that they are more inclined to engage with the other side for positive programming, which means that partnership that I was working toward, that I wanted to build up, was in fact becoming a reality. And there in fact were several partnerships and relationships that were created by various organizations that were previously anti-police that ended up working with police in order to make better policies. So some of the partnership opportunities that become available as a result of this process, you have guest speakers and panels. youth programs. You have to change the mind of the youth. We heard that from Dr. Lee earlier, right? Program collaborations and most of all, relationships. And what this program has resulted in is my nonprofit conducting more than 20 community programs with various law enforcement agencies throughout the region, right? And in this picture, and it's unfortunate you can't actually see the picture, but there's that ring of students are students from this particular university, and it's taking place right across the street in the EOC, the command center for the fire department, right? And the reason we actually had this program was because at Truth and Reconciliation 1, we had University of Laverne students share, I live and go to school literally right across the street from the police department. And that doesn't make me feel safer. It makes me feel more in danger, right? So when Don Kendrick talked earlier, the mayor of this city, I spoke to him, I spoke to Chief Pickwick, and I said, you heard these realities, what can we do about it, right? So we hosted a program called Peace, Police, and Pizza. Everybody likes pizza, right? So we got the students to come together, we gave them free pizza, and they were able to talk. But what's remarkable about this photo, if you're able to see it, only one police officer is wearing their uniform, right? And that particular person was serving as the watch commander at that particular time, so he kind of had to be in uniform, right? Nobody else is in uniform, and the reason is, when I talked to Laverne students, they reported to me that I don't want to meet with police with them wearing their badges and their guns, right? That causes me more fear than it does comfort, okay? So I asked the police chief, if we're going to have a program, can you guys leave your badges and guns, or at least hide them, so that they can't see them, right? And you have the chief of Laverne Police sitting there. He's like right there. Oh, wait. He's right there, wearing a polo and blue jeans, right? And every other police officer is dressed about the same. And this is what helped them have honest discussion. I have Chief Hunt come every semester to talk to my trial advocacy class about use of force. Because in order to critique something, you have to understand it. I bring Lieutenant Vasquez from Pomona PD several times in order to talk to my students as a minority police officer. What are some of the challenges that minority police officers are facing that might be able to have them act as allies for non-police minority within their ranks? Every year, every term, we hold a Meet the Chief program. Chief Poss has participated the last 3 years in this program. This allows for faculty and staff to come together with the mayor and the police chief and ask questions about their city and how their city has been administered, right? It's a justice question. If you have access to the people who are forming policy, then you feel that equality, you feel a voice, and you have more of a reason to engage. But if there's a stifling of that relationship, then you don't come forward, and in fact, we just only perpetuate the hate that is driving much of our emotions today. And then I've been invited for the past 2 years to participate in Police Chief Executive Leadership Training. And what this is officers from the rank of lieutenant all the way up to chief throughout the entire state of California go to the Claremont colleges and sit and listen to us tell them and educate them on the issues of the black community. Well, one of the most profound experiences that I had during this program was I had a police chief from a majority white community say, I don't have access to minorities, but I have a big question. What is wrong with the slogan, "Make America Great Again"? And I looked at him because I wasn't sure if he was actually genuine with this question, and he was. So I said, sir, I want you to put yourself in my shoes for a second. You're a black man. Now, point in history to a place where you would want to live more than now, or a time you would want to live more than now. And he thought about that. And he says, there's no point in history where I'd want to live as a black man. Exactly. If you're talking about again, that means you're going back, right? There's nothing good for us back. We need to keep moving forward. And that police chief swore to me at that very moment that he would never wear the "Make America Great Again" hat. And I'm not judging anybody who wears the hat. I'm not judging any Trump individual. This is not a political discussion. The point is, when people are educated, they gain empathy. And when they gain empathy, they gain understanding. And that understanding causes them to modify their behavior. right? And that's what the process is about. And the final example I'll share is a criminal justice panel that we did. We invited the Claremont Chief, Chief Vanderveen, to participate in this program. And we had the public defender as well as district attorney show up to answer questions from individuals in the community. And this is at a Black Intersections Committee. And at that meeting, we all made the commitment that we were going to work toward a more unified society and community. That is what I consider change. That is what I consider peace generation. Azusa Police Department was recognized for their community work by the International Association of Police Chiefs, right? And they invited me to share my platform. So police agencies all over the world have heard about this type of program, and in fact, many of them are engaged. I called the Ferguson Police Department, and I told him the program that we have going on in this particular region, right? He offered to fly me out to Ferguson to have a discussion about implementing the same type of thing in Ferguson, Missouri, right? So I believe that there's a willingness to participate. The question is, how do we get the right people at the table? And that comes into challenges, right? There are several challenges to this, including double consciousness. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about this, right? There's a two-ness that is experienced from a successful Black individual, right? You still feel the boot on the back of your neck, but at the same time, you're having lunch and being in positions of power with individuals who control that boot, right? So that double consciousness causes me to concern myself as to whether or not I'm actually selling out my community by having these discussions, right? So this has not been an easy process, and I'm not going to tell you it's an easy process. In fact, it's been humiliating at points, because in order to be the moderate nowadays, in our hate-filled time, you become the new extremist, right? Everybody is comfortable hearing, hate them, dislike them, let's burn this place down. That makes people feel comfortable. They resonate with that. But when I say, let's talk to the people that you consider your oppressors, right? I become a traitor. And that's on both sides, right? The police are just as skeptical of me as the Black community is, because nobody talks about moderation nowadays. Everybody wants to go to the side of extremism. There are political limitations, right? The DA has to approve a lot of policies that need to be changed. They have to be at the table. The city council has a role in this. The mayor, all of these groups have some sort of power, but not complete power. So it makes it hard to create a overall change with any particular group. So all of the groups must be brought to the table, which becomes incredibly difficult to do. And there needs to be tangible outcomes. If you're going to want both communities to do something like this, then they have to understand that it's not going to be a waste of their time. Can this apply in the United States? This is my last slide. I think it can, right? If the Department of Justice mandated all local law enforcement to participate in a program like this, and they tied funding to their participation, they would do it. And I think meaningful doesn't need to be judged by the people who are putting on the program, i.e. the people who have the financial interest, but meaningful needs to be judged by the community themselves. Did I get something from this? Was this actually meaningful? Was I actually heard? Were the people of power actually giving me the equality that we need for a process like this to actually work? No criminal prosecution. The system needs to take full responsibility for what it has done to us, right? The human lives that are lost, the Black lives that are lost every single day, right? The system has to take responsibility for that. But the system also has to take responsibility for the cops, the lives that are lost on the police side, right? Both violence on both sides is created by a lacking of education. And I think that lacking of education is perpetuated through many policies that this country has that needs to be revisited. Finally, and I know this is really unpopular, right? But there does need to be meaningful reparations. And one cheap reparation that I can consider or think of is closing the loophole on the 13th Amendment. The government should have no right to make anybody a slave, right? Whether you're in prison or not. When you make somebody a slave, you automatically diminish their humanity. And there's no diminishment of humanity if we're going to talk about peace, right? It was actually said by Garvey very eloquently earlier. In peace, there's justice, and in justice, there is peace. Without justice, there is no peace. So any diminution of human value is an injustice. And that injustice becomes a threat to justice everywhere. So ladies and gentlemen, we can talk about peace, but we also need to talk about mechanisms toward creating that peace. And not only do we need to talk about these mechanisms, we have to be willing and bold enough to engage in them and actively participate. Thank you.